Well, thank you all for coming along. I'm going to be talking about the ethics of digital persuasion. As you, I'm sure, will know, we are very much interconnected in the modern day. It can be very quick to find information that we're looking for and information we're not looking for from various different sources. And we can also distribute information as we want to very quickly too, and to very large numbers of people. Now, this is often very useful, of course, but it also comes with a number of ethical challenges. And today I want to go through some of those ethical challenges. Now, there are a few which have received an awful lot of discussion and attention. You all know about problems with fake news and conspiracy theories going viral online, incitements to violence sometimes, and hate speech. These are unfortunately quite common problems, but I would like to look today at some of the ethical issues that I think may be in danger of going under the radar a little bit, some of the things that are a little less noticeable, but I think still quite problematic. So to begin, I just want to talk a little bit about different ways of influencing people. There are an awful lot of ways of doing it, and I'm going to very, very crudely classify some of these into some of the bad methods of influence and some of the good methods of influence, good or at least neutral ways of doing it. The idea is that if you are forcing, coercing, threatening, etc., then you are doing something that is on the face of it morally problematic, whereas educating, informing, making offers, and so on, these are generally considered to be reasonably innocuous ways of influencing other people, but nevertheless you are having an influence on what other people are thinking or doing. However, the boundaries between these can get blurred in various different ways. Perhaps the most obvious way of doing this would depend on things like the circumstances and the content and the consequences of the influence. So, for example, if you were to inform the local axe murderer of where their next victim happens to be, well, you are informing them, but you're probably doing something wrong. Or if you were to force that murderer into a cell and lock it from the outside, you're probably justified in doing that. What I want to look at is the methods themselves, and my focus, of course, is going to be on persuading, which is often thought to be is often put with the good or at least neutral methods of influence, but I think there are more problematic versions of it. So one of my favorite examples in this regard comes from Mario Puzo's famous novel The Godfather, in which the character Vito Corleone has a great deal of influence, and he will usually exercise this in some of the bad ways, by force, coercion, by manipulating, and so on. But he tends to dress it up as a good way of influencing someone. For example, we are told at one point how he persuades someone to sign a contract by holding a gun to their head until they have done so. He talks of reasoning with people, which is code for threatening them. And when he says of someone they cannot be reasoned with, he means he's going to have them killed because they're not complying with his threats. And of course, most famously, if he makes you an offer you cannot refuse, then really that is a form of coercion, or at least that's what he has in mind. Now, normally, these things, when he says these things, and when he does these things, the reader and also the relevant characters are they do understand what is going on. Nevertheless, it does seem to begin to blur the boundaries. There is a sense in which it is persuasive. There is a sense in which he might be reasoning with someone in that he is offering reasons for doing one thing rather than another. But I think there are even less clear-cut cases. So I want to look at an example now, which I think blurs the boundary between persuasion and manipulation, and then we'll start applying it to the digital technology context in due course. So imagine a politician trying to get elected. They of course need to influence people in a certain way. They need to influence the potential voters to vote for them. Claudia Mills, in a paper in 1995, gave this example. She's imagining two politicians A and B, competing in an election race, and she's imagining what kinds of tactics they might use and whether those tactics may or may not be ethical. So when politician A is in a blue-collar neighborhood, hard hit by the recession, he talks about what he will do to create jobs. He doesn't quite get around to announcing to the conservative voters there his support for gay rights. The latter message he saves for a rally with a gay and lesbian lobbying group, where he somehow fails to mention his proposed budget cuts in government-sponsored medical AIDS research. This he saves for an upcoming rally with Citizens Against the Deficit. Now, it's not obvious that he is using any of the bad methods of influence. There are all sorts of things a politician can do to try and influence the population in an underhanded manner. They could try lying. They could try smearing their opponents. They could try fear mongering. But this politician isn't doing any of that. What he is doing is merely being selective about which reasons he is presenting to which groups of people. Now, Mills herself suggests that this is actually okay because a politician on the campaign trail has limited time. It is perfectly acceptable, in her view, to focus on the things that matter most to a given audience. But notice that that's not all that's going on here. He is picking his messages and matching them to the audience, not just because that's what matters to them, but because that is what's likely to get them to vote for him. So, for example, perhaps issues of gay rights matter a great deal to conservative voters. He doesn't mention that, though, despite the fact that this matters, in fact, in part because it matters to them, because he thinks that will lose him votes. And similarly for the, when he comes to the gay and lesbian lobbying group, he doesn't mention his cuts. The other thing to note about this is there doesn't seem to be, he's not pushing for obviously evil policies. Perhaps you would disagree with the priorities here, but there's if there is something going wrong here, it's not with the actual content. It's something to do with his methods of putting it across. And so I think part of what's going on here is that there is something potentially misleading. If you match the audience to the message in this way, then you run the risk of misleading your audiences about what it is that you have to say on various issues. For instance, if you given that the politician remains silent when he's talking to the conservative voters about gay rights, they may infer that he doesn't have anything particularly important to say about it. Or his later audience, the gay and lesbian lobbying group, may infer that he doesn't have anything particularly important to say about the medical research. And so this is potentially a problem here, but I won't dig too deeply into that, and we can perhaps discuss it later on. So to bring us to the online context, this is, again, I'm going to be very crude in my presentation here. This is a very rough idea of how persuasion can work online. So there is user activity to begin with. For instance, you like a page on Facebook. That data is collected, so Facebook will note the fact that you have liked this page. Then it gets analyzed. So for instance, if those who like this particular page tend to be more susceptible to certain kinds of content, this will be based on huge amounts of data gathered on large numbers of people. And so with algorithms, the user will be shown more of that particular content. Now, what it means to be susceptible is going to depend on the nature of the content that they want to show the user. So for instance, if the content is an advertisement, then susceptibility will be a matter of being more likely to buy the product or service being advertised, but it might also be a matter of getting users more engaged or more active, or just staying on the platform for longer, because of course the longer you stay on the platform, the more data can be gathered. It's worth noting, by the way, that although I am here talking about something that is quite explicitly an action of some sort online, clicking a like button, it is possible these days for data to be collected on more subtle things. For example, if you're scrolling through on, for instance, TikTok, if you're scrolling through videos and you pause to look at something, you don't actually click anything, but you just pause in your scrolling. The fact that you've paused will be noted, and that will go into what kinds of things you get shown later on. But I think this is fairly similar to what Mills's politician A was doing in the previous slide, finding audiences and matching the messages to them. And of course, you can do this with far greater precision online than you could in using traditional campaigning methods. I'm using the politician as an example here, but this applies to advertising campaigns, fundraising, charities, various groups pushing various ideologies or trying to support different causes. They can all use this sort of thing to try and have an influence. And so, yes, you can do this with much greater precision online, working out which messages are most likely to be most persuasive to which audiences. And it doesn't have to be you're addressing a certain group of people in a certain neighborhood or at a certain convention or whatever it might be. You can actually precisely target them online using the data that has been gathered on them, and so it's a lot more efficient, basically. One other thing to note is these things, this way of doing this, it can in theory be used in a beneficial way, in an innocuous way. It can be used to target you with things which you actually find interesting or enjoyable or are useful to you. But in actuality, it's more often about making a profit, and that may be that may add an ethical dimension to it. Okay, I'd also like to talk about free speech online, and this is a topic you hear a lot about. I would like to address it from an angle that I think perhaps doesn't get addressed quite as often as certain others. So firstly, of course, given the immense speed, the immense reach, and as we've just been talking about, the precision of getting messages across using digital technology these days, it's a lot more, speech can be a lot more powerful than it used to be. And, with increased power, we need to be aware of ethical issues more than before. In particular, the particular aspect I would like to bring up is that freedom of speech is not just about the freedom to say what you want to say. It's also about to whom you say it, and also about what you do not say. Freedom of speech is freedom to keep silent, at least some of the time. And I think that this is quite interesting, because in the examples we've just been talking about, if you imagine the first example with the politician addressing different messages to different parts of the population, imagine they now go online, they do the same thing, but with far greater efficiency, far greater precision. They can tailor their messages to different audiences, but they can also tailor their audiences to different messages in order to have far greater impact. I mentioned one of the problems there is that in not saying certain things to certain groups of people, they may be misleading them. Now, if that is the case, then they may be doing something wrong by remaining silent. And so here we have a potential conflict between the right to not say something if you don't want to, or at least to not say something to particular people if you don't want to, and the duty to not mislead. Now, this is not a matter of only saying certain things because you are under time constraints or because only certain things are relevant. If you think about online campaigns, they show lots of messages, often pushing the same sort of idea, maybe in different ways. it's not that there is limited time or limited space. They can put out lots of different kinds of content if they want to. And so the question is, should there be a compulsion to give relevant information rather than keeping silent on it? And I think that is one of the questions about free speech that perhaps doesn't get focused on quite as much as, for instance, the right to free speech balanced against the right not to be offended, for instance. Now, another issue that we may want to talk about is what difference does it make when you bring this issue online? Is the online realm just another place where people can have discussions and talk? Is there anything really ethically special about this? I'm not going to take a definite stand on this, but I want to highlight what I think are 5 possibly ethically significant differences between the online realm and well, one might say real life, but perhaps I should just say the offline realm. So firstly, there, as we've already said, there's the sheer scale and speed. You can reach a lot more people far more quickly. Your persuasive speech may be far more powerful than it would have been in the past. Next, there's the issue of motive. Often when people are being persuaded online, it's not about trying to correct them, trying to improve their knowledge, or trying to get them to agree with you. It's actually just done because it's profitable. It's not about trying to imbue in people attitudes or behaviors that are true or beneficial. It's about gaining profit for oneself. Of course, that can happen offline as well. But again, it can happen on a far greater scale online. Another is that online persuasion will sometimes, perhaps often, be one way. You don't get to respond to the advertising campaign or the online election campaign in the way that you would be able to respond to someone if you were talking to them face to face. You don't get to persuade them of your point of view. You don't get an opportunity to give them a counter argument. And so it's very much, or at least it can be very much a one-way stream. Then there's the issue of small numbers of companies or individuals gaining monopolies. They may not necessarily succeed in persuading everyone of what is true or what they should think or what they should be doing, but they are able to set the agenda. They are able to say, these are the things that ought to be discussed, whatever you think of them. And that may be a problem for only a few companies or even a few individuals to be making that decision. And finally, there's the issue of anonymity. This is linked to those already given. You can't, you are deprived of the opportunity to respond if the other person is anonymous, and you may also have trouble verifying what they're saying and cross-checking it. And of course, you won't know whether they are just a random person giving their opinion or whether they are actually an expert on the matter. Yes, using that doubt can lead to problems in terms of what you may or may not believe, or even just lead to uncertainty in terms of what is true. Even if you are not convinced of a falsehood, you may end up thinking, well, some people say this, some people say this other thing. I'll sit somewhere in the middle, even if in actual fact the evidence on one side is pretty compelling. For instance, on climate change, you might think that could be an issue. Now, in the last few minutes, I want to talk about a common excuse that comes up from platforms, from Facebook, for example, for why it is that it's not really their fault that these problematic things occur. The idea is that they are just the providers of the platform. They are providing the place where people can discuss and interact. They're not responsible for the actual content that gets posted, for the kinds of interactions that are had. However, I do not think that they are passive in these persuasive acts. They are actively involved. The reason is, as was mentioned earlier, it's not the content of the speech that I'm focusing on at the moment. It's not the hate speech, the incitements to violence, the fake news. All of that is very bad, but I'm not focused on the content at the moment. I'm looking at the methods of persuasion. And if these methods are problematic, the gathering of data, the targeting of specific individuals or specific groups in order to have the most impact, if that is problematic, then these platforms will also share the blame. The Twitter, Facebook, Google, and so on, if they are facilitating these methods of data gathering and targeting. And so I don't think that they have that straightforward, easy excuse. Okay, now that was just quite a quick run through, of course, but thank you for your attention. I hope that it has been a helpful sort of introduction, and yeah, I look forward to hearing what you have to say about it. Thank you.